The message was still open on my phone when Seaman Torres knocked on the hatch frame. "Petty Officer Callahan? Comms room, now. It's the same number again." I was Petty Officer First Class Marin Callahan, 11 years in the Navy, currently 3 weeks into a deployment aboard the USS Colby Reach, and the number lighting up the ship's shoreside line for the 4th time that week belonged to a woman who had texted me exactly one sentence before I shipped out. "Don't expect me waiting when you're back." That woman was my fiancé. Was. I didn't know what tense to use anymore. I followed Torres down the passageway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my boots hitting the deck plates in the same rhythm I'd used for 11 years to walk into things I didn't want to walk into. In the comms room, the duty radio man held the handset out to me like it was something hot. "She's asked for you by name 3 times this week," he said. "Says it's urgent. Won't say why." I took the handset. "This is Callahan." There was a breath on the other end, the kind you take before you say something you've rehearsed. "Marin," she said, "I need you to listen to me before you hang up." I didn't hang up, but I also didn't sit down because some part of me already knew that whatever came next, I was going to need to be standing for it. 10 days doesn't sound like a long time until you spend it stacked on top of 11 years, and 11 years doesn't sound like a long time until you realize it's longer than some marriages last. I'd met Dana Whitfield at a change of command ceremony in Norfolk, back when I was a second-class petty officer with sunburned forearms and no idea what I was doing with my life outside of the fleet. She was a nurse at the base hospital, sharp-tongued and steady-handed, and she laughed at my jokes before I'd finished telling them, which I took correctly as a sign she was smarter than me. We got engaged on a Tuesday in March, no ring yet, just a promise and the second-hand car we were saving up to trade in. I proposed with a ring pop because the real one hadn't come in from the jeweler, and she wore it around for 2 weeks before it cracked, and she cried harder about the ring pop breaking than I ever saw her cry about anything else in the 4 years I knew her. So when my detachment orders came down for a 6-month deployment, I wasn't worried. We'd done shorter stretches before. We had a system. She'd send a photo of whatever she was cooking that didn't turn out right. I'd send back a photo of whatever the mess deck was serving that looked worse. It was small, and it was ours, and it worked. The night before I left, we sat on the tailgate of that same second-hand car outside base housing, and she was quiet in a way I told myself was just nerves. "You all right?" she asked. "Every chance I get." "Promise?" "Dana, I've never broken a promise to you." She looked at me for a long second, like she was deciding whether to say something, and then she just nodded and put her head on my shoulder, and I thought that was that. The text came 4 hours after we pulled out of Norfolk, while I still had 1 bar of signal before we went dark for open water transit. "Don't expect me waiting when you're back." No explanation, no follow-up, then nothing because we lost signal, and I spent the next 9 days turning that sentence over in my head at 0300 during engineering watch, trying to find an interpretation that didn't feel like a door slamming. I didn't tell anyone. Grief you can't explain is easier to carry alone, or at least that's what I believed at the time. I did my job. I stood my watches. I signed off on maintenance logs and ran my division and nodded when my chief asked if I was doing all right. And I said, "Fine, chief," because that's the answer you give. Then, 10 days later, she started calling the ship. "I made a mistake," Dana said, her voice thin and metallic through the ship's radio line. "I need you to know that before anyone tells you a version of it that isn't true." "A version of what, Dana?" I kept my voice level. 11 years in the Navy teaches you to sound calm when you are not calm, and I was not calm. "Your mother's been staying with me," she said. "Since you left. She said it would look better for the paperwork." "What paperwork?" Silence, then quieter. "Marin, I need you to sit down." I did not sit down. What she told me over the next 6 minutes. 6 minutes. I checked the call log later. 6 minutes that rearranged the entire architecture of my life. Was that 8 days after I deployed, my mother, Carol, had shown up at our apartment with a folder of documents and a story about how she was just helping while I was gone. Dana, 26 years old and blindsided by a woman she'd called family for 4 years, had signed things she said she didn't fully understand. A power of attorney. A refinance application on the house we'd bought together 18 months earlier, the one with both our names on the deed. A beneficiary change on a savings account. She told me you'd asked her to handle it, Dana said. She told me you didn't trust me to manage money while you were gone, and that it would hurt your feelings if I made a big deal out of it. Marin, I believed her. She's your mother. Why wouldn't I believe her? I hadn't asked my mother to handle anything. I hadn't spoken to my mother in 9 days. The text I sent you, Dana said, and her voice cracked for the first time. She told me to send it. She said if I texted you something cold like that, you'd focus on getting through the deployment instead of worrying about the house stuff, that it would be easier on you. I didn't want to send it. I've regretted it every day since. And then she stopped answering my calls, and I started finding paperwork I don't understand. And Marin, I think something is very wrong. I stood in that comms room with the handset pressed so hard against my ear it left a mark. And the first thought that came to me, clear and cold as the water outside the hull, was, my mother has been planning this since before I left the pier. I want to be straight with you about what kind of person my mother was, because you need to understand her to understand what came next. Carol Callahan was 61 years old, a retired county clerk, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and organized the neighborhood potluck and had, for as long as I'd known her, an unshakable belief that she knew better than everyone else what was good for them. She wore the same gold cross necklace every day of her life, and she had a habit, you'd recognize it if you met her, of saying, I'm only doing this because I love you, right before she did something that had nothing to do with love at all. She had never liked Dana, not loudly, never in a way I could point to and call unfair, just small things. A comment here about how some people don't know how to save money, a comment there about how she hoped Dana understood what she was marrying into. I'd chalked it up to a mother having a hard time sharing her only child. I had been wrong about a great many things, it turned out. I got off that call and I did not sleep that night. I lay in my rack with my eyes open, running through timelines, and the next morning I went to see the one person on that ship whose judgment I trusted without qualification. Lieutenant Commander Reyes, my department head, a woman who'd been in the Navy 19 years and had, as far as I could tell, never once panicked about anything. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of mercy. And when I finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered a plan. First, she said, you do not call your mother. Not yet. The moment she knows you know, she has time to cover tracks. Second, you get legal assistance on comms today, this morning, and you find out exactly what a power of attorney executed under these circumstances is worth, because I suspect the answer is less than she thinks. Third, she tapped the desk between us. You keep standing your watches. You do your job. Don't give this ship a reason to think Petty Officer Callahan can't handle her division because her personal life caught fire. You handle both. That's the job. It was not comfort. It was better than comfort. It was traction. The legal assistance attorney I got on the line that afternoon was a Navy JAG lieutenant named Priya Anand, and she had the unhurried patience of someone who had heard every version of this story before and was not going to let mine surprise her into a bad answer. I read her everything Dana had told me, and I could hear her typing on the other end. Okay, Lieutenant Anand said. First thing, a power of attorney signed by your fiancé doesn't give your mother authority over property that's in your name and Dana's name jointly. It doesn't matter what your mother told her it meant. If your mother forged your signature on anything or represented herself as having authority from you that she didn't have, that's not a family dispute anymore. That's fraud. Get me copies of every document Dana signed, today if you can. And if she did forge my signature? Then we're not talking about a misunderstanding. We're talking about a crime, and I need you to start treating it like one, which means documentation, not confrontation. Do not call her and accuse her. Let her think she's still ahead. I hung up and sat in the small gray legal assistance office they'd rigged up below decks, and I thought about the last time I'd seen my mother, 3 weeks earlier, hugging me at the pier and telling me to be safe, her cross necklace catching the sun, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very still. Not sadness, something more useful than sadness. I asked Dana to scan everything and send it through Reyes's encrypted account, since Dana didn't have a secure way to reach the ship directly. It took 2 days. In those 2 days, I ran my division like nothing was wrong, because that's what Reyes had told me to do. And it turned out she was right. The work gave my hands something to do while my head sorted through the wreckage. When the documents came through, I understood why Dana's voice had cracked on that call. The power of attorney was dated the day after I deployed. My signature was on it. I had never seen that document in my life. I stared at it for a long time on the small screen in the legal room, the fluorescent light humming overhead, Lieutenant Anand's voice waiting on the line. "That's not your signature?" she asked. "That is not my signature." "Okay, then we have forgery, and forgery changes everything about how this gets handled. I want you to look at the second document, the refinance application." The refinance application listed our house, the one Dana and I had bought together, the one with the crooked mailbox we'd been meaning to fix for a year, with a new sole owner, Carol Callahan. My mother had refinanced our house into her own name, using a forged power of attorney and my forged signature, 8 days after I left for deployment. There was a third document, a beneficiary change on a Navy Federal Savings account Dana and I kept together, $34,000 we'd been putting aside for a wedding, redirected to my mother as sole beneficiary in the event of incapacitation. I want to tell you I felt rage in that moment, something loud and immediate. What I actually felt was quieter and worse. I felt like the floor of my own life had been quietly removed while I was standing on it, board by board, and nobody had told me until I was already falling. "There's a fourth thing," Lieutenant Anand said, and I could hear something careful entering her voice. The tone people use when they're about to hand you something heavier than what came before. "Dana mentioned your mother told her you'd asked her to handle this. Did your mother tell anyone else a version of events? Because if she's built a narrative, told your father, told extended family, told anyone, that changes how we sequence this too. We don't want you walking into a family gathering blind." I called Dana back that night through the ship's line. "Has she told anyone else anything?" Dana was quiet for a second. "Marin, she told your Aunt Rosalind that Dana and I broke up because I was cheating on you while you were deployed. That's why your aunt hasn't returned my calls. That's why nobody in your family has reached out to me. She's telling people I'm the reason your engagement fell apart." I sat with that for a long moment. My mother had not only stolen from us, she had built a story to make sure that if I ever found out, I'd have no one left to believe me over her. She wasn't just covering her tracks, I thought. She was burning the bridge behind me so I couldn't cross back. Here's what I want you to understand about being on a ship in the middle of an ocean while your life is being dismantled 12 time zones away. You cannot do anything about it except be good at your job and wait. The Navy does not stop because your mother committed fraud. Watches still rotate. Maintenance still gets logged. I spent the better part of a week running general quarters drills with my division, standing over a diesel generator with grease up to my elbows, and there was something almost holy about the fact that the equipment didn't care what was happening in my personal life. It just needed to run right. So I made it run right. Reyes checked on me twice a day without making it feel like checking. She'd stop by engineering, ask about a maintenance log, then ask almost as an afterthought, "Anand get back to you?" I came to understand that was her way of holding a hand out without making a show of it. It was during one of these routine stretches, a Tuesday, nothing special, just watch rotation and paperwork, that Lieutenant Anand called with what she described as a complication. "Your mother filed something," she said. "A notarized affidavit attached to the refinance paperwork, stating that you have power of attorney concerns related to, and I'm quoting here, the beneficiary's history of financial instability and infidelity." The beneficiary being Dana. The beneficiary being Dana. "Marin, this affidavit was notarized by someone named Gregory Pell. Does that name mean anything to you?" It did. Gregory Pell was my mother's next-door neighbor, a retired notary public who'd stamped half the documents in our zip code for the last 20 years, a man who I'd have described, if you'd asked me a month earlier, as harmless. My mother had gotten a notary, a man who trusted her, a man who'd known me since I was 12 years old riding my bike past his lawn, to stamp a document containing a lie about my fiancé without verifying a single fact in it. "I want to talk to him," I said. "Not yet," Anand said. "Let me handle the notary. You have a different problem right now, which is that this affidavit means your mother isn't panicking. She's building a paper trail to justify what she's already done, which tells me she thinks she's going to need to defend this in front of somebody eventually, probably you. That was the moment it stopped feeling like betrayal and started feeling like a war I hadn't agreed to fight. My mother wasn't hoping I wouldn't find out. She was preparing for the moment I did. The next reveal came from the one person in this story I didn't expect to hear from at all. My father. Robert Callahan had been divorced from my mother for 19 years, and in that time, our relationship had settled into something distant but polite. Birthday calls, a visit at Christmas, nothing deep. He called the ship through the family emergency line, which meant Reyes personally walked down to engineering to pull me off watch, her face unreadable in a way that told me this wasn't good news, but also wasn't the worst news. "Marin," my father said, and his voice had a rawness to it I'd never heard from him. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I didn't understand what I was agreeing to until it was already done." He told me that 6 weeks before I deployed, my mother had asked him, her ex-husband, a man she hadn't asked for anything in nearly 2 decades, to co-sign a private loan. She told him it was to help me and Dana with wedding expenses, a loan she said I'd asked her to arrange quietly because I didn't want Dana to feel financially indebted to my family before the marriage even started. My father, wanting to do something decent for a daughter he felt he hadn't done enough for over the years, had signed. The loan had gone through a private lender at a brutal interest rate, using our house, my and Dana's house, as informal collateral, secured by the same forged power of attorney. My father hadn't known any of that until the lender's paperwork crossed his desk, asking about repayment terms he'd never seen before, on a house he didn't know had already been refinanced into his ex-wife's name. "I called her," my father said. "She told me it was a misunderstanding, that she'd sorted out. Marin, I don't think there's a version of this where $60,000 against your house is a misunderstanding." I stood in that passageway with the phone against my ear and did the math in my head, and it kept climbing. The house, the savings account, now a loan against the house that neither Dana nor I had ever agreed to. My mother hadn't taken one thing. She'd built a structure, quietly, methodically, piece by piece, the way you'd build a case, except the case was against people who trusted her. "Dad," I said, "did she ever say why?" "She said she was protecting the family's interests. She said Dana was going to leave you eventually and take everything with her, and she wasn't going to let that happen while you were overseas defending the country and couldn't protect yourself." She'd convinced herself she was the hero of this, I thought. That's what scared me most. I called Lieutenant Anand back within the hour, and for the first time in the whole ordeal, I heard something shift in her voice. Not surprise exactly, but recalibration. "This is bigger than a family dispute now," she said. "We have forgery, fraudulent notarization, an unauthorized loan secured against jointly owned property, and a documented pattern of deception across at least 3 separate people. This is not something we settle with a family conversation when you get home. This is something we take to civilian counsel and likely law enforcement, and I want prepared for what that means. It means this gets slow, and it gets formal, and it may get worse before it gets better." "How much worse?" "I don't know yet, but Marin, I want you to hear this clearly because I think you need it right now more than you need reassurance. You didn't cause this. You didn't miss something you should have caught. Your mother built something specifically designed to work while you were unreachable. That's not a flaw in you. That's the whole design of what she did." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about the tailgate conversation the night before I deployed. "You'll write? Promise?" And Dana's hesitation. The thing she almost said and didn't. I understood it now. She'd already met my mother's version of help by then. She just hadn't known yet how deep it went, and she hadn't wanted to hand me one more thing to worry about crossing an ocean. I didn't blame her for that silence anymore. I recognized it. It was the same instinct that had kept me quiet about the text message for 9 days. Reyes found me in the passageway outside legal that evening, and she didn't ask what happened. She just said, "Walk with me." And we did 2 laps around the weather deck in the dark, the wake churning white behind us, the horizon nothing but black water and stars. And she didn't offer advice this time. She just let me not be alone with it for 20 minutes. Sometimes that's the tactical move, too. The homecoming was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and by the time the ship pulled into port, Lieutenant Anand and a civilian attorney she'd connected me with, a fraud specialist named Denise Okafor, had built a file 3 inches thick. Forged signatures, verified by a handwriting analyst. Notary logs showing Gregory Pell had violated state notary law by failing to witness my actual signature. Bank records showing the beneficiary change and the loan disbursement. A paper trail that didn't require anyone to believe my word over my mother's, because it didn't depend on anyone's word at all. I didn't go home first. I went straight from the pier, still in uniform, to a conference room in a downtown law office, where Okafor had arranged a meeting she told my mother was to discuss the property transition, worded vaguely enough that Carol had agreed to come without knowing what was waiting for her. My mother walked in wearing her gold cross necklace and a blazer I recognized from every important occasion of my childhood, and she smiled when she saw me, the automatic smile of someone who still believed she had the upper hand. "Marin," she said, "you're home early. They said Friday." "Sit down, Mom." She sat. Something in my voice must have registered, because the smile faltered at the edges. Okafor didn't waste time. She slid the folder across the table and opened it to the first document. "Mrs. Callahan, this is a power of attorney bearing your son's signature, executed the day after Petty Officer Callahan deployed. Our handwriting analyst has confirmed this signature does not match any verified sample of Petty Officer Callahan's handwriting on file with the Navy or the Department of Motor Vehicles." My mother's face went very still. "I don't know what you're—" "This is a refinance application, transferring sole ownership of a jointly held property into your name, using that same forged power of attorney." Okafor turned the page. "This is a beneficiary change on a savings account belonging to Petty Officer Callahan and Ms. Whitfield. And this," she turned the final page, "is a notarized affidavit containing false statements about Ms. Whitfield, notarized by a man who has since given a sworn statement that he never witnessed the signature he certified." My mother's hand went to her necklace, the way it always did when she was buying time. "I was protecting this family. You were committing fraud against your son and forging his signature to do it," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. 11 years of standing in front of people and holding a line finally worth something. "Dad co-signed a loan against a house he didn't know was involved because you lied to him too. You told Aunt Rosalind that Dana cheated on me so that if I ever found out what you'd done, I wouldn't have anyone left who'd believe me. You did all of that while I was on a ship where I couldn't call you, couldn't confront you, couldn't do anything but wait. I did it because I love you," she said, and her voice cracked on the word love in a way that, a month earlier, would have undone me completely. "You did it because you decided you knew what was best for my life better than I did," I said. "That's not the same thing." She didn't have an answer for that. For the first time in my entire life, my mother didn't have anything to say. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, going through the loan documents with Okafor's paralegal, we found something none of us had been looking for. The private lender who'd issued the $60,000 loan against our house, the one my father had unknowingly co-signed, was a small operation run out of a strip mall, and their paperwork showed my mother had taken out 2 other loans in the past 3 years, against 2 other properties, using the same pattern. One of them belonged to my cousin Nate, a Marine stationed overseas at the time his loan was taken out, using a similarly irregular power of attorney. His own mother, my mother's sister, had apparently helped facilitate, believing, just as Dana had, that she was helping a family member handle logistics for a deployed relative. Nate didn't know yet. He was still overseas. I made the call myself, ship to ship through fleet channels, because I couldn't sit on it. When I told him, there was a long silence on the line, and then he said, "She did this to you too?" And I understood in that moment that my mother hadn't targeted me because I was somehow uniquely vulnerable. She'd found a pattern that worked. Deployed service members, unreachable for months at a time, trusting relatives with power of attorney out of necessity. And she'd used it more than once. That was the twist that finally made the whole thing make sense to me. This wasn't a mother making one terrible choice out of misguided love. This was a woman who had built a method. The consequences, when they came, were not fast, but they were thorough. My mother pled guilty to forgery and fraud, rather than risk a jury seeing the full documentation Okafor had assembled. She received 5 years, with restitution ordered for both my family and Nate's. Gregory Pell, the notary, lost his license and was fined for the false certification, but the investigation found no evidence he'd known the affidavit contained lies. He'd simply trusted a neighbor he'd known for 20 years and stopped doing his job carefully. He came to my father's house 8 months later, unprompted, and apologized in person, and then spent a Saturday afternoon helping my father clear out the garage, the kind of quiet, unglamorous repair that doesn't erase a mistake but does something almost as good. My father never faced any legal exposure. He'd been deceived as thoroughly as anyone, but he carried a guilt about it for a long time anyway, the kind that doesn't respond to being told it isn't your fault. He and I are closer now than we were before any of this happened, which is a strange thing to be grateful for, but I am. Dana and I didn't get back the wedding fund my mother had redirected. The account had already been partially drained before the freeze went through, but the refinance was reversed, the house restored to both our names, and the forged loan voided entirely once the fraud was established. Dana still keeps the cracked ring pop ring in a drawer, for reasons she's never fully explained to me and I've never fully needed her to. The text she sent me before I deployed, "Don't expect me waiting when you're back," turned out to be the one thing in this entire story that was never a lie. She just meant something different by it than I understood at the time. She wasn't telling me not to expect her. She was telling me not to expect the version of our life my mother had already started dismantling. She was right. That version was gone. We built a different one instead. 1 year later, Dana and I got married in the small ceremony at Lieutenant Commander Rhea's insistence that I not let one more deployment go by engaged instead of married, Callahan. That's an order. And Rhea stood up as a witness, and Nate flew in from his new duty station, and my father walked Dana's mother down the aisle because somewhere in the last year, the two of them had become close in the specific way that people who've survived the same storm sometimes do. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to save them from a bad situation. What I learned, standing in that comms room 10 days into a deployment with a phone pressed to my ear, is that sometimes the person you're waiting to hear from isn't calling to leave you. She's calling because she refuses to let you be lied to while you can't defend yourself. That's not abandonment. That's the opposite of it. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you know someone who's serving right now, far from home and trusting the people they left behind, share this with them. Sometimes the people who wait for us are the strongest ones in the whole story.